You're doing everything right, and you can feel it pulling you underwater. The promotion came through. The salary is higher than anything you imagined 5 years ago. Your friends call you the responsible one. You have the retirement account, the health insurance, the credit score that makes loan officers smile. And somewhere between the direct deposit hitting your account and the rent clearing 3 days later, there's this window where you feel almost wealthy. Almost. Then the month closes and you check what's left, and it's the same number it always is. Something close to nothing. Not broke, never broke, just never free. There's a property rule that changes this. Not a strategy, not a hack. A structural shift that moves you from earning well to building wealth that compounds in your sleep. But the rule only works if you understand something about your first property that almost nobody talks about. And that thing, the thing most people get catastrophically wrong, is the reason someone making $80,000 builds a net worth of $2 million, while someone making $200,000 retires with almost nothing to show for it. That sounds impossible. Hold that thought, because the math behind it is going to make you physically uncomfortable around minute 15. Let's start with the lie. The one that's so woven into your thinking you've never even noticed it's there. You believe, because everyone believes, that a higher income creates more financial safety, that making more money means having more options, that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is an income gap. It's not. It was never an income gap. Watch what actually happens when income rises. Not what people say happens. What happens? The salary goes up 12%. Within 6 weeks, the lifestyle has absorbed 13%. Not because of greed, because of gravity. Financial gravity. The nicer apartment that finally feels appropriate for someone at your level. The car that doesn't embarrass you in the office parking lot. The dinner with friends where you pick up the check because you can now, because it feels good to be the one who can. None of it feels like waste. That's the dangerous part. Every single upgrade feels earned, feels necessary, feels like the minimum acceptable standard for someone who works this hard. And it is the minimum. That's exactly the problem. Because every new minimum is a new floor, and floors don't come back down. Think about a river, not a fast one, a wide, slow river cutting through flat land. Most people stand on the bank watching the water move, and they think the key to crossing is swimming faster. So they work harder, they earn more, they paddle furiously, and the current carries them at exactly the same speed regardless. They're expending enormous energy to stay in the same relative position. That's what increasing your income without changing your structure looks like. More motion, same location. Now think about someone who doesn't try to swim faster. Instead, they walk upstream to where the river is narrow, where it's 3 feet wide instead of 300. They step across on dry rocks, while everyone downstream is drowning in effort. The first property, the one that actually builds wealth, is that narrow point in the river. It's not about force, it's not about income, it's about choosing the crossing point before you start moving. And the crossing point has 5 specific characteristics that almost nobody selects for because the entire industry is designed to push you toward the widest part of the river, where the current is strongest and the swim is longest. Here's what most people do. They wait until their income feels high enough. They save for years. They finally qualify for a mortgage on a property that matches their lifestyle expectations. A place that feels like them, that reflects their taste, their status, their arrival at a certain tier of adulthood. And on the day they close, they feel wealthy for about 45 minutes. Then, the first mortgage payment hits. Then the property taxes. Then the insurance. Then something breaks, and they discover that owning a home isn't owning an asset. It's subscribing to a building that sends you random invoices for the privilege of sleeping inside it. Within 18 months, they're more financially constrained than they were as renters. Their net worth might be technically higher on paper, but their actual freedom, their ability to absorb a bad month, to say no to a terrible opportunity, to quit something that's killing them slowly, is gone. They traded liquidity for equity. An equity you can't access is just a number that makes your spreadsheet look better, while you stress about whether the roof will last another winter. Now let me tell you about the first property that actually works. Not the one that looks right, not the one that feels right, the one that functions as a wealth engine. The distinction is everything, and almost nobody makes it. Because making it requires you to separate two things that most people have fused together so completely they can't even see the seam. Your home and your first investment property are not the same decision. Most people make them the same decision. They buy one property and expect it to be both the place they live and the foundation of their financial future. That is the single most expensive mistake in real estate. Not because the property is bad, because the criteria conflict. The property that makes you feel successful and the property that makes you wealthy operate on completely different logic. The property that feels right is in the nice neighborhood with the good schools and the walkable restaurants. It has the layout you want, the finishes you like, the space that makes you feel like you've arrived. It also costs the maximum amount you qualify for, generates zero income, and locks every dollar of your financial margin into a single illiquid asset that you can't sell without disrupting your entire life. The property that builds wealth is boring. It might be a duplex in a neighborhood you'd never post about, a small multifamily in a zip code that doesn't impress anyone at dinner, a unit that cash flows $300 a month after every expense is covered. $300 a month sounds like nothing. Remember that, because what $300 a month becomes over time is the answer to a question you haven't thought to ask yet. The first rule is so simple it feels insulting. Buy below your approval amount. Not slightly below, dramatically below. If the bank says you qualify for $400,000, you buy at $220,000. Not because you can't afford more, because the gap between what you can borrow and what you choose to borrow is the most valuable space in your entire financial life. That gap is oxygen. It's the margin that lets you absorb vacancies, repairs, rate increases, and every other thing that real estate throws at new owners in the first 3 years. Most people close that gap on day one. They borrow the maximum, spend the maximum, and enter ownership with zero room for anything to go wrong. Then something goes wrong, because something always goes wrong. And they're calling their parents, or maxing a credit card, or lying awake doing math that doesn't resolve no matter how many times they run it. The second rule cuts deeper than the first. The property must generate income independent of your salary. This is where 90% of first-time buyers disqualify themselves, because they're buying a home, not an asset. A home costs you money every month. An asset pays you money every month. Your first property needs to be an asset. Maybe you live in one unit and rent the other. Maybe you rent the whole thing and live somewhere cheaper. Maybe you house hack in a way that covers 80% of the mortgage with tenant income. The structure matters less than the principle. The principle is this. If you lose your job tomorrow, the property should not become a crisis. It should become a cushion. That single distinction, crisis versus cushion, separates the people who use real estate to build wealth from the people who use real estate to build anxiety. The third rule is the one nobody wants to hear. You buy for the math, not the mirror. The property doesn't need to reflect who you are. It needs to reflect what you want to become. And what you want to become is someone whose money works while they sleep. not someone whose home looks good on a video call background. This means you evaluate properties the way a business evaluates equipment. What does it cost? What does it produce? What's the delta? If the delta is positive, it's a candidate. If the delta is negative, it's a consumer product disguised as an investment, and you walk away no matter how good the kitchen looks. The fourth rule is about time, and it is the rule that separates millionaires from people who almost became millionaires. You hold the first property longer than feels comfortable. The average person sells their first property within 7 years, usually because they've outgrown it, usually because their lifestyle has expanded and the property no longer matches who they think they are. They sell, capture some equity, roll it into a bigger home that costs more and produces nothing, and reset the entire wealth building clock back to zero. The person who builds wealth in the millions does something different. They keep the first property. They refinance. They pull equity strategically. They use that equity as a down payment on the second property, then the third. Each one cash flowing, each one paying itself down, each one quietly compounding while they go to work and live their normal life. After 10 years, they don't have one property, they have 3 or 4. None of them impressive individually. All of them generating income that their salary never needs to touch. And this is where the numbers stop being theoretical and start becoming the kind of math that rewires how you think about your entire career. That $300 a month from the first property, in year 1, it's $3,600. It barely registers. It's a rounding error on your tax return. But you didn't spend it. You saved it. Combined with the equity building in the property as the tenant pays down your mortgage, after 5 years, you have roughly $60,000 in combined equity and accumulated cash flow. $60,000 from a property that most people at your income level would have considered beneath them. You use $30,000 of that as a down payment on property 2. Property 2 cash flows $400 a month because you've learned. You know what to look for. You know what questions to ask. You know what the spreadsheet needs to say before you sign anything. Now you have $700 a month in passive income. Still not life-changing. Still not enough to quit anything. But the trajectory has changed. The angle of the curve is different now, and angles compound. By year 8, property 1 and 2 together have generated enough equity and cash flow to acquire property 3 without touching your salary at all. The machine is feeding itself. You didn't work harder. You didn't get a massive raise. You didn't inherit anything. You just made one boring decision 8 years ago and then refused to undo it. By year 12, the combined portfolio is generating somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 a month in net cash flow. Your mortgage balances have been ground down by tenants paying rent. Your equity position across 3 or 4 properties is approaching $700,000 on a salary that never exceeded 6 figures. This is how people who earn $80,000 or $90,000 end up with a net worth over $2 million, not through income, through structure. Through the first property doing what the first property is supposed to do when you select it correctly, and then leave it alone long enough for compounding to finish the sentence you started. And here is where something changes inside you that has nothing to do with money. When you have $4,000 a month coming in, whether you work or not, you negotiate differently. You sit in rooms differently. You respond to pressure differently. Not because you're performing calm, because you are calm. The math has removed the stakes from situations that used to terrify you. Your boss makes an unreasonable demand. You used to absorb it because you needed the job more than they needed you. Now you have options, real ones backed by cash flow, not confidence. You can afford to be patient. You can afford to say no. You can afford to wait for the right opportunity instead of lunging at the first one out of fear. That patience, that silence, that willingness to let a moment breathe instead of reacting, That is the most expensive capability in professional life. And almost nobody has it, because almost nobody has built the financial floor that makes it possible. People describe this as confidence. It's not confidence. Confidence is a feeling. This is a position, a structural position where the worst case scenario in any negotiation, any career move, any relationship is manageable. You're not brave. You're solvent in a way that mimics bravery so precisely that nobody can tell the difference. And the world rewards it exactly the same. Opportunities come to people who don't need them, because the absence of need reads as competence. It reads as selectivity. It reads as someone who has options, and therefore must be worth pursuing. This is the leverage that no salary increase can replicate. You can earn $500,000 a year and still lack this leverage if every dollar is committed before it arrives. And you can earn $90,000 and radiate it if your structure is right. The first property is the foundation of that structure. Not the only piece, the first one. The one that teaches you the game, absorbs your early mistakes, and starts the clock on a compounding process that your future self will either thank you for or wonder why you never started. Now here's the part where nearly everyone fails. And I don't mean sometimes. I mean the overwhelming majority of people who get this far, who buy the right first property, who see the cash flow start, who feel the shift beginning. They destroy it in the same way every time. They sell too early. They see the equity and they convert it into lifestyle. They upgrade the car, they move into a nicer home, they take the equity out and spend it on things that feel like rewards but function as resets. Every dollar of equity you convert into consumption is a dollar that stops compounding. And compounding doesn't forgive. It doesn't pause. It doesn't wait for you to come back. The person who pulls $100,000 in equity out of their first property to buy a bigger home isn't making a lateral move. They're making a catastrophic one. Because that $100,000 left in the structure, leveraged into another income property, would have generated its own returns, its own equity, its own cash flow for decades. You don't feel the loss in the year you make the decision. You feel it 15 years later when you calculate what the portfolio would have looked like if you'd left the machine running instead of dismantling it for parts. The fifth rule is the one that sounds the least like a rule and matters the most. Do not let your lifestyle consume what the structure is building. The cash flow is not your spending money. The equity is not your upgrade fund. The portfolio is not proof that you can now afford to live bigger. It is the engine. And engines only work when you stop pulling pieces out of them to decorate your living room. The gap between you and the person who retires with $2 million on a modest salary is not intelligence. It's not luck. It's not access. It's the willingness to let a boring asset do boring work for a boring amount of time without interrupting it. That's it. That is the entire secret. And it is so profoundly unsatisfying to hear that most people reject it immediately and go back to looking for something more exciting, more sophisticated, more worthy of their ambition. While the guy who bought the duplex in 2014 and never sold it quietly crosses a net worth threshold that the ambitious people won't reach for another 20 years, if they reach it at all. That feeling from the beginning, the one where the direct deposit hits and the month closes, and you're left with something close to nothing, despite doing everything right. That feeling doesn't come from not earning enough. It comes from having no structure beneath you, no floor that holds independent of your effort, no asset that works while you sleep, no position that converts time into equity without requiring your presence. The first property is that floor, not the dream home, not the forever house. The boring, income-producing, strategically selected, stubbornly held first property that nobody congratulates you for buying, but everyone quietly envies 10 years later when they realize what it became while they were busy looking impressive. You can build it, not because you need more income, because you already have enough. You've always had enough. You just kept handing it all to a lifestyle that promised freedom and delivered a more elegant version of the same trap. The 5 rules aren't complicated. Buy below your means, make it produce income, choose math over aesthetics, hold it longer than feels reasonable. Never let your lifestyle consume what the structure is building. That's it. That is how ordinary income becomes extraordinary wealth. Not through brilliance, through patience applied to the right structure at the right time. And the right time, if you're hearing this, if something in you shifted even slightly, if the river metaphor is still sitting in the back of your mind, the right time was years ago. The second best time is the width of this silence.